Welcome back, everybody. Ready for another deep dive?
Always.
Well, today we're really getting into it. Biblical prophecy.
Oh, yeah.
We're going to be looking at how it might connect to what's going on in the world today, especially with what we're seeing play out in the Middle East.
Right.
And we're going to be basing this deep dive on an article by Matthew Marr.
Okay.
And the article is called "Connection to the Bible and Today's Events. Do you see it?" So kind of a provocative title, right?
Anthony.
And Marr, well, he doesn't beat around the bush. He really seems to believe that understanding these connections between the Bible and what's happening in the world is, well, it's crucial, especially right now.
Yeah, he really emphasizes that right from the get-go. He's trying to, I think, frame the Bible, specifically its prophecies, as like almost a guidebook, maybe even a roadmap for understanding, what's happening on the global stage.
Okay.
And a key part of his whole argument really centers on the nation of Israel, its role in what he calls God's plan, and how recent events, seem to align with specific prophecies.
So he's saying we can like predict the future based on these ancient texts.
Well, not necessarily predict in a literal sense.
Okay.
But maybe understand some of the broader trends at play, the underlying forces, And one of the most important prophecies that he keeps coming back to is this idea of the 70 weeks.
Okay.
It comes from the book of Daniel.
70 weeks. Now, I know we don't want to get too bogged down in the details.
Right.
But can we break it down at least a little bit? Like, what are these 70 weeks?
Well, think of it this way. It's like a timeline for God's plan.
Okay.
A countdown, if you will.
Okay.
Leading up to something called the Messianic Age.
Okay.
Now, the first 69 weeks of this prophecy, most scholars agree, have already happened.
Okay.
Leading up to the destruction of the Second Temple in 70 AD.
Oh, so this is where we get that idea of the paused prophetic clock.
Right, exactly.
Like, something happened, and put from the whole timeline on hold.
Right. And according to Marr, that pause, well, it ended in 1948 with the rebirth of Israel.
Wow.
He sees that as like a pivotal moment. Like hitting the reset button on the clock.
And he connects it to verses in Isaiah and Ezekiel talking about, a nation being born in a day and dry bones coming back to life.
Right.
It's pretty powerful imagery.
Yeah, it is. And when you think about it, I mean, the fact that Israel, after being, scattered for centuries, came back together as a nation in 1948, it's pretty remarkable.
It is. So where does that leave us today?
Well, that's where things get really interesting.
Okay.
Because if you follow this interpretation, we're now in that final week.
That's 70th week.
A 70th week. And that week, well, it's associated with a period of intense, tribulation, often called the time of Jacob's trouble or the Great Tribulation. But before we get into that, Marr, he wants to address what he sees as like a big misinterpretation of prophecy.
Okay.
It's this idea of replacement theology.
I've heard that term before, but I'm not sure I fully get it.
Yeah, it can be a bit confusing. Basically, replacement theology is this idea that the Christian church, it has, in a sense, replaced Israel in God's plan.
Okay.
All the promises made to the Jewish people, well, they now apply to the church instead.
Okay.
But Marr, he pushes back hard against that.
Okay.
He argues that this idea, it completely contradicts the whole structure of the 70 weeks prophecy.
So he's saying that Israel still has a unique role to play in all of this.
Precisely. And he even acknowledges that even though Israel is central to God's plan, their actions, well, they're not always in line with God's will,
Right.
It's not a blanket endorsement.
Right. And he even brings up prophecies from Ezekiel and Zechariah that describe future conflicts involving Israel.
Right.
But how does he see these conflicts fitting into this whole bigger picture?
Well, he believes that these conflicts, as devastating as they are, ultimately serve God's purpose.
Okay.
And he sees the current conflict in the Middle East, the recent Hamas invasion, as a sign that we're moving closer and closer to the fulfillment of these prophecies.
So he's making a direct connection between what's happening right now and these ancient texts.
He is. And this is where he introduces the idea of a figure known as the man of lawlessness.
The Antichrist.
The Antichrist.
Okay.
He believes that the world, with all its conflicts and chaos, is becoming ripe for the emergence of this figure.
So who does he think this Antichrist might be?
Well, he offers some some interesting possibilities.
Yeah.
He suggests that, some Jewish people, maybe those who have strayed from, their traditional faith, might be deceived into accepting the Antichrist as their Messiah.
Oh, so what kind of false Messiah figure?
Right.
Who ultimately betrays them?
Right. He even suggests that this figure could be involved in rebuilding the Third Temple in Jerusalem.
Wow.
And potentially even reinstituting animal sacrifices.
It's a pretty dramatic and unsettling scenario.
It is, yeah. It really taps into those deep-seated fears, deception, betrayal, especially within a religious context.
Right. But then he kind of throws a curveball, doesn't he? He suggests that the Antichrist could also possibly be connected to the Islamic State.
Yeah, he ties that in with, the Islamic belief in the Mahdi.
Mahdi, okay. Remind me, who's the Mahdi again?
Right, so the Mahdi in Islamic tradition is this messianic figure who is prophesied to come and lead a final jihad and establish a global Islamic caliphate.
So we've got these two very different but
Yeah.
equally kind of unsettling possibilities. It's almost like a choose-your-own-adventure for the apocalypse.
Kind of, yeah. And either way, Marr sees, the current climate, particularly the rise in anti-Semitism and what he calls anti-Christ sentiment, as further evidence that we're moving towards some kind of the final, I guess, spiritual showdown.
Right.
He even connects it to that imagery of a cosmic battle in Revelation 12.
It's all very intense, and I have to admit, a little overwhelming.
Sure.
But before we, spiral down this rabbit hole of doom and gloom, can we maybe step back for a sec
Yeah.
and look at the bigger picture here? I mean, Marr he's presenting a specific interpretation, right? One that's pretty heavily influenced by a particular theological framework.
Of course, yeah.
Are there other ways of looking at these prophecies, other interpretations that maybe aren't so, apocalyptic?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, even within Christianity, there's a whole range of beliefs when it comes to interpreting prophecy.
Okay.
Some people, they take a very literal, premillennialist view, like Marr, where they see a very specific sequence of events that lead up to a literal 1,000-year reign of Christ on earth.
So they believe everything will play out exactly as it's described in the book of Revelation.
Pretty much, yeah. But others, they hold, maybe a more symbolic or allegorical view.
Okay.
Where they see these prophecies as conveying spiritual truths
Okay.
rather than literal historical events.
So different lenses, different ways of reading the same text.
Exactly.
But even if you're not someone who buys into a very literal interpretation of end times prophecy, there are still some pretty big questions that Marr raises.
Right.
I mean, the world does feel, regardless of how you interpret these things, pretty unstable right now.
Yeah.
We've got wars, famines, natural disasters, political polarization. It's all there.
Yeah, it's hard to ignore.
It is hard to ignore.
And I think that's why, even if you set aside the more apocalyptic aspects of Maher's argument, his core message about discernment and awareness, I think, feels really relevant right now.
You mean being able to sort through all the information out there,
right?
And figure out what's real, what's hype, what's truth, what's spin.
Exactly. I mean, we are constantly bombarded with information, often with conflicting narratives, different agendas.
Right.
Being able to critically evaluate that information to understand the historical and theological context, I think, is essential.
Yeah.
And maybe, just maybe, it can help us make sense of all the chaos, even if we don't, think that we're on the brink of some grand, prophetic fulfillment.
So it's not about panicking or becoming obsessed with trying to decode every headline as some kind of a prophetic sign.
Yeah.
It's about what?
I think it's about cultivating that critical thinking muscle,
Mm-hmm.
that ability to step back and ask, okay, what are the different ways of interpreting this?
Right.
What are the underlying motives, the agendas at play here?
Mm-hmm.
How does this connect to the broader sweep of history, of human nature?
I like that. It's about being engaged, being thoughtful, but not letting fear kind of take over.
Exactly. And that to me is one of the most valuable takeaways from Maher's article. Even if you don't, agree with every single interpretation.
Right.
He's challenging us to think critically about the world around us and to recognize that even in the midst of, all the uncertainty, there may be deeper patterns, deeper meanings at work, whether they're divinely ordained or simply a reflection of human nature.
So we've covered a lot of ground here, from ancient prophecies to modern conflicts, from the intricacies of biblical interpretation to the importance of critical thinking in a world that's just saturated with information. It's a lot to process.
It is. And it's important to remember that Maher's interpretation is just one perspective among many.
Right.
We talked earlier about, the spectrum of beliefs within Christianity.
Right.
And it's worth, I think, exploring some of those alternative viewpoints.
Mm-hmm.
After all, understanding, the full range of interpretations, I think, can help you develop your own perspective.
Absolutely. So what are some of the other ways that people view these prophecies? You mentioned amillennialists, postmillennialists.
Right.
Can you unpack those for us a bit?
Sure. Amillennialists, they believe that the 1,000-year reign of Christ that's mentioned in Revelation is symbolic,
Good.
representing the present reign of Christ in the hearts of believers. They don't see a literal millennium
Okay.
or a specific sequence of end times events.
So for them, the focus is more on the spiritual reality of Christ's presence, right now.
Exactly.
Okay.
Then you have postmillennialists
Okay.
who believe that the world will gradually become more Christianized before Christ's return.
Okay.
They tend to be, more optimistic about the future.
Okay.
They see, human progress as part of God's plan.
So they see things getting better, not worse.
In a sense, yeah. And then you have, historic premillennialists
Mm.
who like Maher believe in a literal 1,000-year reign of Christ, but they don't necessarily see a specific order of events leading up to it. They're
Yeah.
a bit more flexible in their timeline.
So it's almost like a giant puzzle.
Yeah.
Where everyone has a slightly different idea of what the final picture is supposed to look like.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah.
And that's what makes studying prophecy so fascinating and potentially frustrating.
Right.
There's no one definitive answer. No single interpretation that everyone agrees on.
Right.
It requires, wrestling with these complex theological concepts, historical context, personal faith experiences.
Which brings us back to that idea of discernment, right?
Yeah.
Being able to sift through these different viewpoints, weigh the evidence,
Yeah.
and ultimately come to your own conclusions.
Exactly.
Even if they're, tentative or evolving.
Right. And I think a healthy dose of humility is also essential.
Right.
I mean, we can't claim to have all the answers,
Right.
perfectly decode all the mysteries of prophecy.
Right.
But we can engage with these questions, honestly and thoughtfully,
Yeah.
seeking wisdom and understanding from a variety of sources and allowing our faith to guide us, even in the midst of uncertainty.
That's beautifully put. Okay, so we've explored the complexities of biblical prophecy, the different interpretations out there, the importance of discernment. But before we wrap things up, I want to leave you with one final thought, something to kind of chew on as you go about your day.
Okay.
And it's this: if the Bible can be seen as a sort of guidebook, as Maher suggests, does that mean free will is somehow limited? Are we all just following a predetermined script?
That's a profound question. Does prophecy dictate our destiny? Or does it just illuminate the path, leaving us free to choose which way to turn?
Yeah, it really makes you think, doesn't it? I mean, if these prophecies are meant to guide us, do they also constrain us? Where does free will fit into all this?
It's a question that's been around for centuries, Theologians, philosophers, they've been wrestling with this for a long time, and there aren't any easy answers, but maybe instead of getting stuck on whether everything is preordained or not, maybe we can shift our focus to how we respond to these prophecies.
You mean how we choose to live our lives?
Exactly. Think of it this way. What if these prophecies, instead of being like like rigid predictions
Mm.
are more like warnings or even opportunities. What if they're meant to kind of wake us up
So what?
to the potential dangers and the possibilities that might be out there, and that allows us to make more, I guess, informed choices.
So instead of being, passive passengers
Right.
on this predetermined course,
Right.
we become active navigators.
Exactly.
Charting our own course through the rough waters of history.
Precisely. And this kind of brings us back to Murr's initial point
About
awareness. If we really are living in a time of heightened spiritual significance, as he suggests, wouldn't it make sense to be as informed and prepared as possible? Not in a fearful way or paranoid, but with a sense of clarity and purpose.
So instead of getting lost in the weeds trying to pinpoint exact dates or decode, cryptic symbols,
Right.
maybe the real takeaway here is to develop a deeper understanding of these ancient texts, their historical context, and the different ways they've been interpreted throughout history.
Absolutely.
So that we can make, our own informed decisions about how to apply these teachings to our own lives.
I think you really hit the nail on the head there. Knowledge, especially self-knowledge, it can be incredibly empowering. It allows you to see the world through a more nuanced lens.
Yeah.
Recognize patterns and connections that you might not have noticed otherwise. And who knows, maybe that deeper understanding can even lead to more compassionate, more effective action in the face of all the challenges that we're facing right now.
It's like those optical illusions, where you see one thing at first, but then with just a slight shift in perspective, a whole new image emerges.
Right.
Maybe that's what studying these prophecies can do for us.
Yeah.
Help us see the world and ourselves in a new light.
I love that analogy. And remember, it's not about just blindly accepting one interpretation over another.
Right.
It's about engaging with these ideas, thoughtfully, critically, prayerfully, allowing them to challenge your assumptions and expand your understanding.
So it's a journey of discovery.
Yeah.
A process of wrestling with these big questions and ultimately coming to your own conclusions, even if they evolve over time.
Exactly. And I think that's a beautiful thing because ultimately, our faith should be a living, breathing thing, not a rigid set of doctrines or beliefs.
Yeah.
It should challenge us.
Yeah.
It should inspire us and guide us as we navigate, all the complexities of life.
Well said. So to our listeners, we encourage you to keep exploring these topics. Don't be afraid to ask tough questions, challenge, conventional thinking and seek wisdom from a variety of sources. The world is a complex and ever-changing place. And sometimes the most ancient wisdom can offer the most profound insights into the present moment. So keep questioning, keep seeking, and keep the conversation going. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.